Hey everyone, so what I'm going to do today is walk through responding to the first prompt having to do with the two Ebola articles. So, the reason why I wanted to do this is for some of us, we might be feeling a little nervous because Monday and Tuesday we have our sample ALST exam and we're unsure of how we're going to um, tackle three responses in 2 hours and 10 minutes. And so, part of what I want to say in order to alleviate some of that stress is remember, it is a practice exam. And the other thing I want to say that sort of has to do with this video is the only way to really figure out how to manage time is to practice, practice, and practice some more. The other reality is where when we're writing in our personal lives or for assignments, we have the luxury of thinking, rethinking, and rethinking some more. With a timed exam, you really want to come in with outlines already in your head, not outlines with specific content, but outlines meaning, okay, so I need a sentence that says what passage A is arguing, a sentence that says what passage B is arguing. This is how I'm going to respond to this kind of prompt. You want all of that information already in your head so that when you're taking the exam, you don't have to think about that as well. That's really a huge part of getting rid of some of that, or rather, saving some time. And so, what I want you to see here, you'll notice this is a document. Obviously, when you're taking the actual exam, um, the document will look a little different because it's on computer software for testing. But the idea I wanted you guys to see is I am annotating the articles that I've been given. So there were two articles that I read, that we all read, Six Reasons to Panic and Massive Improvement. And you'll notice for both, I felt it necessary, one, to just for my own memory. This is the last name of the author. I thought maybe it would be important to note the year it was written. Um, this might seem irrelevant for the first prompt. However, when you're looking at the argumentative prompt, the extended essay, this might become useful when you're looking at the data presented in the chart. And so you'll notice basically what I did is I just jotted down a couple of ideas that I felt were especially interesting. I put quotes here that I thought maybe I could reuse. And the other thing is, when you're taking the exam, you get to see the whole exam prior to actually sitting down and writing and annotating, right? So you can actually go to prompt one and see what the prompt is going to be. You can go to prompt three and see the question that you are meant to answer. And that can also help you annotate. So if you know that at the end of this exam, you are going to have to answer the question of, is panic the appropriate response? Then while you're reading these two articles, you're going to jot down some things that you think might help you when answering that response, right? So, okay, you'll see, the basic argument I felt, and we all felt, having read your responses in Six Reasons to Panic, is there are a number of reasons why a controlled panic is in order. Last talks about a number of different things. The fact that the Ebola virus is not the kind of virus that we think it is, it's mutated. You'll see here I pulled a quote. Ebola virus has the potential to be transmitted via infectious aerosol particles, both near and at a distance. There's also mention of what's to stop a jihadist from going to Liberia, getting himself infected, and then flying to New York and riding the subway until he keels over. There's also information from last about President Obama saying in one breath it's not easily transmittable, and then in the next breath saying in fact it is. And then for the second article, I noted a couple of things. Liberia is citing a decrease in the amount of Ebola cases, and then I mentioned a quote, or I, copy and pasted a quote in which the president is sort of delighted that there's been a decline in the amount of patients in hospitals, which should indicate to us a decline in Ebola cases. I also, in this circumstance, I also looked at the graph and just noted a couple of questions, or one question really. The amount of cases has increased dramatically since 2014, according to the graph, but there is no mention of the U.S. So there's mention of all of these different countries in Africa, but nothing of the U.S. Okay, so that again, and I promise you, you didn't get to see this in real time, but I promise you this took me, I read the article and then I annotated, and it took me a total of 30 to 40 minutes. This might seem like a lot of time that you're dedicating to reading and writing that has nothing to do with the essay, but you'll see that it's going to help me significantly in responding to the prompt. So the prompt that I want to do in real time is the first prompt. So I want to have the prompt in front of me in some way, just so I make sure I'm doing all of the different things that they're asking me to do. So it says 200 words, right? That's really important for me to know. Outline the specific claims made in each passage. So they want to know the claims that each passage is making. Evaluate the validity, relevance, and sufficiency of evidence used to support each claim. Include examples from both passages to support your evaluation. So essentially, I need to identify who has the stronger argument. I need to make sure that each article's argument is clear, and then I have to explain why one argument is stronger than the other by using validity, relevance, and sufficiency. In other words, credibility, pathos, and enough logos, right? So again, now in real time, I'm going to actually respond to this prompt. So I have 11:07, and I'm going to show you that it's possible to do this in a limited amount of time. So the first thing I want to do is give what the claims are in each passage. So for me, passage A argues the need to have a controlled panic in response to the Ebola outbreak. So that's what large argument passage A is making. Again, I'm choosing to define last as passage A and massive improvement as passage B. If you wanted to, you can refer to the title. So two things. Either or could work, but when you do the passage A, passage B route, you want to make sure that your lettering is correct. There have been a number of you who have said passage A makes the more compelling argument, and then somewhere down the middle you forget that you said passage A and you accidentally put B. So if you're going to use passage A, passage B, just make sure you're actually referring to the correct passage. Okay, so that doesn't count towards my time because that was a digression. Passage A argues the need to have a controlled panic in response to the Ebola outbreak. So the next thing I want to do is say what passage B is doing. Passage B for me is arguing, or argues, right? Because I want to stay consistent with the tense. Passage B argues instances of Ebola in Liberia are decreasing, and therefore there is no need to panic, right? And you'll notice you have a sentence here that's in need of a comma and a fanboy, right, to make it a complete compound sentence. So I've established the two claims. Now I need to figure out who makes the more compelling argument. So I'm going to say passage A presents a more compelling argument. Now I have to figure out why. I can choose to separate it into a different paragraph. Passage A uses one reason why I felt it was especially strong, and I didn't note it here, but there was mention of WHO and the increase in cases and how that sort of indicates that Ebola is something that we need to be concerned with, right? So passage A uses, information from national organizations like WHO to indicate the rapid increase of Ebola cases. What else does it do? Well, in this quote, I see that it has information from the University of Minnesota, so I want to talk about that too. It also presents evidence from the University of Minnesota. In this instance, to indicate how dangerous the evidence, or really no, how dangerous the virus has become. And now it seems like I might want to give a quote, right? Include examples from both passages. So I'm going to say I want sort of a signal phrase. Passage A states, and then I'm going to actually pull the quote that I've already gotten here from here to here. I'm going to put a quote. So this is talking about how, the transmission of this disease has become way more, it's easier to transmit the disease than we think. So this is my quote, and I want to explain what particular part of the quote is interesting. So the contagiousness of the virus further supports the need to contain the virus through careful and controlled panic. Now notice, if I followed the rule of my integration checklist, I would have this quote, and I know the next thing I need to do is explain how this quote supports my thesis statement, right? So I have this quote, and this is how I'm explaining its relationship to the thesis statement. How does this quote show that this is a stronger argument? Well, because it supports the actual argument. The contagiousness idea of this quote supports the idea that we need careful and controlled panic. Now, I've mentioned logos, right? I've mentioned credibility by indicating the government institutions. I haven't really dealt with pathos. A lot of you mentioned this fear tactic that LAST uses, and so for me, that can actually be a way to indicate its being stronger. So I might put passage A also uses fear tactics to indicate the need for panic. Or maybe passage A also uses, how about real life scenarios in which the virus could become dangerous. This supports the need for panic. Passage A also uses real-life scenarios in which the virus could become dangerous. This supports the need for panic. Maybe I want to say especially when he notes the possibility of using the virus in a terrorist attack, right? So I've covered the relevance, validity, sufficiency of passage A. Now I need to talk about passage B, and now I want to see, I don't know if you can see. Well, let's do it like this. So if I go highlight everything, and I go to tools, and I go to word count, I'm at 158 words. Okay, and I need 200 words, right? 100 to 200. So let's talk about passage B now. Well, passage B does attempt, right? You want to talk about what it tries to do, does attempt to argue that Ebola cases have decreased. We need to, so we're saying this is what it tries to do and explain why it doesn't do it well. And the biggest thing in passage B is it only talks about Liberia, and Liberia does not represent the whole world, and so that's a major flaw in passage B. It fails to acknowledge how Liberia's decrease in cases relieves stress from the rest of the world. Instead, the article cites President Johnson as saying, and then what does she say? She says, she says this. Oops. All right, let me fix that. All right, well, hopefully. Okay, I'm not gonna play around with this too much. Okay, so that's a quote, right? She says that most of the treatments units are experiencing a decline in patient intake. Additionally, so while she mentions this decline, she does not mention the reason for the sudden decrease, and she does not provide any information on how to prevent a spread of the disease from happening again. Okay, so again, I would go back and say, did I include examples from both passages? Yes, yes. Did I outline the specific claims? Yes and yes. Did I evaluate relevance, validity, and sufficiency? Yes. I will say, because, it, you never have a perfect response. You could always improve. While I think my validity is here and I think my sufficiency is here, I do think I could have done more with relevance. Relevance meaning, are the pieces of evidence that the passages are using really related to the actual argument? And so if I wanted to go further with relevance, I might talk about how, passage B talks about the need to not panic. However, it doesn't really give appropriate evidence to support that. Instead, it focuses way too much on ETUs and the fact that there are less patients that are in the hospital. But if these people with Ebola are dying, they wouldn't be in the hospital, right? They would just be dead. And so, how does this really relate to her overall argument? That's unclear. Again, I started at 11:07. Huh. So technically, I'm under time. Um, and again, this is just my personal process, and as you all know, I've practiced 500,000 times, and so that's probably why the speed is as it is. However, if you practice as well, and if you really go through this step of annotating, it will be as easy as it just was for me. And even, hopefully you saw there were moments where I sort of struggled with figuring out how to word things. And I also noted that I possibly would want to add a couple of things. Um, Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I want you to remember Monday, please come in on time. We are going to go through the entire ALST exam. Also, remember Sunday is the deadline to submit any and all assignments that you have missed. So you want to make sure that you take care of that. And I am, for the most part, done grading anything that's been submitted. So you should also visit your grade center and see that your overall grade has probably jumped significantly, especially for those of you who have done extra credit. I will see you Monday, and have a fabulous Sunday. And yeah, okay.